Welcome to The Point. You know, Memorial Day was first celebrated on May 1st, 1865. People are going to look back at what the first Memorial Day episode of The Point was. And it's this one right here. I'm Michael Shure. I'm hosting for you today. We have three fantastic points on tonight's show. And one of them comes from comedian Kevin Rooney, and he is going to be talking about care for returning vets and the kind of care that they're receiving. Our second point is going to be coming from Adam Kokesh, who is the host of the Adam versus the Man radio show. And then we're going to be talking a little bit later about games like Call of Duty, video games, gamers, all of that and their effect on the military. I have a fantastic panel joining me here today on The Point. Mike Prysner is an Iraq War veteran who is now an anti-war activist. He founded March Forward, or March Forward, because it has an exclamation point afterwards, an organization that encourages current active duty service personnel to resist deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. Next to him, Sheryl Shaffer. Sheryl served as a personnel specialist in the Women's Army Corps from 1968 to 1971, and today is the host of Veterans Helping Veterans, which can be seen on Blip TV. And next to me, Robert Vaughn, a former aviation technician in the U.S. Navy, who in 2010 actually ran for Congress, was in the 38th District of California, Los Angeles State Director of the Republican Liberty Caucus. I have to take a break in your resume. And he's also the California State Coordinator currently for the presidential campaign of Ron Paul. Thank you all for joining us on The Point today. I want to hear this point from Kevin Rooney first, and then I want to come back and talk to each of you. I have some questions. I find it to be a provocative point. Let's listen.
My name's Kevin Rooney, and I am a veteran. When I get out of the Army, I got a full GI Bill, I got great medical care, and I'm enraged that veterans returning from these wars are not given the best possible medical care and the best possible facilities. And I'm enraged that the people who are doing so much to strip them of their benefits and strip them of their health care are people who never went to war. It disturbs me no end that people like George Bush and people like Dan Quayle said, well, I was in the National Guard and I was ready to go to war, at a time when the National Guard never went to war. And then he gets in office and sends the National Guard to war to some sort of backwash and making him look like a possible potential hero. Dan Quayle once said to Larry King, Larry, I was in the National Guard and I was ready to serve if called. I said, well, why not just give yourself a Purple Heart while you're at it? I would have done great if I was in the military. And that enrages me, is the way people who weren't even in the military not only go to war, but then never give the proper care and attention to people who did go to war.
That's comedian Kevin Rooney. Mike Prysner, I want to start with you. When listening to Kevin Rooney, what he says does resonate to a degree. We so many of the people, and this is the first time since 1944 that we have two men running for president, or two candidates running for president as the nominees, presumed nominees, and I'll defer to you with Ron Paul. Let's say it looks like nominees of their party that had no military service at all, yet they are going to be the commanders-in-chief sending people away to foreign wars. And in that case, as we look at it right now, they're also the people who are responsible for taking care of those returning veterans as they come back to the States. Is there a problem when you have people who have never served in the military making the decisions that Kevin Rooney is talking about here?
Well, I think his point is correct, that as service members, those who are making decisions about our lives, whether it's the treatment that we're receiving when we get home, or whether it's whether or not we're going to have to go over and over again to the war in Afghanistan, the people who are making the decisions about our lives are the people that are affected, not affected by the war in any way whatsoever. And it's not just the politicians in Washington, but the defense contractor CEOs, the oil tycoons, all of the lobbyists who sit in Washington, all of the people who are telling us, go to war, patting us on the back, saying we're all in this together, and then when we get home saying, well, there's not enough money for veterans care, there's not enough money for jobs programs. Those people are not in any way affected by the war. It's not their children who are going to Afghanistan, it's not their neighbors that are having their legs blown off. So really we have a situation where tens of thousands of service members, hundreds of thousands of service members are having their lives essentially thrown away by people who don't feel the effects at all. But I will say that the comment is really just scratching the surface of the problem, because he's just addressing the issue with VA benefits, government benefits for veterans once they get out of the military. The real crisis today is inside the U.S. military, whereas there is an epidemic epidemic of suicides, where more active duty service members are killing themselves than are being killed in combat in Afghanistan. That's a really shocking number, and that's happening because the military brass, the generals, the battalion commanders are refusing to care for soldiers in any meaningful way, not just refusing to care for them, but actively denying them treatment.
Sheryl Shaffer, what Mike is saying is true. You hear about these suicides, and there is a disconnect between the people who are making a lot of those decisions. But Mike is talking about people who are active military, people who are battalion commanders. And I am not a military man. I appreciate everything the military does. I was not raised in it. I did not serve in it. But I think, as any American would, I appreciate what they do. But so I can only defer to battalion commanders. But there is a problem. And so from the military culture, how is that corrected from within?
That's a complicated question with a complicated answer. We can't do enough for these people coming back from this war. We simply cannot do enough.
Is this war different than other wars? You say this war. I mean, we were in Afghanistan, we've had Iraq, we've had Kuwait, we go back to this Vietnam and Korea.
Yes, Vietnam, I'm a Vietnam era veteran. Different war. This war is multiple deployments. How much can the human body take? You cannot get enough rest. A lot of these people are hyper alert all the time. They can't slow down. They're depressed, PTSD, and the suicide rate within the active duty military is the worst it's ever been.
And do we know that that's different than it has been in the past? I mean, I don't know if statistics were kept on suicide in Vietnam, but Robert Vaughn, tell me, like, when we hear about the perils that soldiers face coming home, is that something that, to the naive onlooker, it seems like that's happened forever?
I don't think there has been problems with PTSD. The real issue is they've done a lot of psychological studies before this, before World War II, during that time, and they knew that a soldier on the front lines had to take a break, and that's why they would send them back in the back lines to get rest. In Vietnam, they figured out, okay, 1 year deployment in service in country, and still even you go back behind the lines to get rest. With these guys going multiple times, year after year, it not only just takes a toll on the human body, it takes a toll on the human psyche, because your endorphins and all your brain, chemicals are being at a constant high level, especially when you have to keep at that top level of alertness, as you put. And after a while, your brain chemistry and your actually brain neurons begin to change. And that's why you see what's happening. Right. You start moving into depression. You can't keep, like what they call bipolar. You can't constantly live at a high level. Right, there's always that downside, and that's what you're seeing. These guys living at a high level, they get over to a soft sort of, area like this, nice and quiet, and still their brains are at a completely depressed state.
As I listen to it and we talk about the problems, there seems to be a 99%, 1% element to this too. It's so much a part of the political vernacular now. But when in the military it is as well, because the advocacy that these returning soldiers have, not just for being redeployed, but for the treatment that they get here when they come home, seems so inadequate. And you see the people that are making money off of these wars, and you see the people that are spending money in these wars. It feels as if that 99%, 1% kind of maxim can be applied as well to the military. Would you agree with that, Sheryl?
Yes. Only 1% serves in the military. So the 99% needs to take care of the 1%. That's what it comes down to.
And as a returning Iraq War soldier, someone who's served more recently than anyone on this table, on this panel, is that true? I mean, does that resonate? Do you feel like you don't have a voice as a returning soldier?
Well, me personally, I don't, because when I got out of the military, like thousands of other veterans of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I decided to exercise the only type of real democracy we have in this country, and that's exercising democracy in the streets through taking part in mass action, civil disobedience, protest actions that really challenged what this government was trying to do. And I'm joined by many thousands of other veterans and active duty personnel who have done the same exact thing. And what you're saying about the idea of this lack of resources and this 1% kind of controlling things, I mean, they're telling us that they can't provide a jobs program for veterans. They can't provide adequate disability compensation or adequate mental health treatment because it's an issue of resources, right? There's just not enough money, as they really like to say. But when it comes to the defense contractors, of course, there's a blank check for that brand new fancy piece of equipment that service members know does absolutely nothing useful, or its only use is blowing up lots of innocent human beings. So the resources are out there. The resources are just locked up with a very small group of people who are getting very, very rich off of the war, while people like us are the ones who are suffering.
Mike, you said that people don't understand. One of the things that people don't understand, and I'm putting myself in those people, is you said service members know that it's not necessary. So we sit back and we hear about it. Oh, the government's spending all this money on this new plane, right? And we think, okay, that's fantastic, that's progress if we are, hawks of any kind, and if we're not, we think that's a waste of money. We should be spending it on teachers and schools and hospitals and whatever else. But the point is, we feel that it appeases the service people because this is modern day equipment that is going to appease the service people. That's not at all the case.
Well, if you want to look to see what will appease service members in today's military, the number one thing that will appease service members in today's military is not sending them to Afghanistan.
Coming home.
The vast majority of service members, by all polls, show over 75% do not want to be going to Afghanistan, cannot explain what the war is about, which reflects mainstream opinion in the United States, where over 2/3 of the American public opposes the war in Afghanistan. So the number one issue for them is constant deployment to a war that they shouldn't be fighting.
And Robert?
Yeah, and what they said is true. I mean, even when they come home today, we had a fight down here in San Vicente in Wilshire, and there was
That's the
home,
Veterans Administration
home that was given to them back in 1888 in perpetuity, for veterans themselves. And I have a friend, Bill Dumas, who has been doing this film, Duty, Honor, Country, and Betrayal, showing the issues of that thing. This is where these guys come over. I want to say sometimes they should have, golden bedpans, but at least a silver one. This is ridiculous. We don't take care of the people that they say are on our front lines defending our defense and
Constitution. And going to what Mike said, I mean, the most sort of enraging part of this is that people are making money off of these wars. Defense contractors, private contractors, the profiteers that are making money, and yet we're not able to give a bedpan to a returning soldier. I mean, that to me, that is the 99-1 that I'm talking about, and that seems to be. And I don't think we can end this segment without talking about what the curative efforts are, not just for the soldiers, because that's what we're talking about essentially too, but the situation. And do any of you have any ideas about what is going to have to happen in order to change this culture?
Absolutely. I mean, right now, the politicians, the officers in the military have shown without a doubt that they are refusing to address the PTSD epidemic, the emergency situation with suicides. The politicians have proven that they are going to refuse to address that crisis and that they are going to continue the unpopular war in Afghanistan endlessly. I mean, there's a pact until surpassing 2024. And so because the generals, because the politicians have both indicated that they are refusing to address this major crisis, both with PTSD and deployment to a war that most don't support and that we shouldn't be fighting, we can no longer wait for the government. We can no longer wait for the politicians. It has to be veterans, active duty service members organizing amongst themselves, collectively organizing in their own interests. And that's what we are doing today. And that's what thousands are doing today, is organizing together, standing up, saying, if we don't want to deploy, we don't have to. If we're getting mistreated in our units, then we can organize together and we can fight for our rights. That's what so many have done already.
And that makes a lot of sense. Robert Vaughn, I'm going to give you the last word on this. Without elected officials who have served in the military, are we as a country disserved?
Yes, we are. And, there's a small book, and I'm going to give you a copy of it. It's called Wars of Racket by Major General Smedley Butler. He says, Wars of Racket always was. And this guy who's twice decorated Congressional Medal of Honor winner, and before World War II. And the real thing about this is that they're a disservice since they don't know what the service is. And I think before they start sending people to war, they should at least spend some time in the military front lines, maybe, at least in the supply lines.
Yeah, I would imagine there's unanimity amongst you and many others on that subject. Thank you all. We will be back with another point in just a moment. Welcome back to The Point. Michael Shure with you, joined by Mike Prysner, Sheryl Shaffer, and Robert Vaughn. And we are going to hear our next point brought to us by Adam Kokesh of Adam versus the Man, the radio show. Here is Adam Kokesh.
Hi, my name is Adam Kokesh. I'm the host and executive producer of Adam vs. the Man, a Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq occupation and co-founder of Veterans for Ron Paul. My point is that Ron Paul is the choice of the troops, not despite his foreign policy, but because of his foreign policy. Most sheeple who hear that Ron Paul has received more campaign contributions from active duty service members than all other candidates, including Obama combined, either dismiss or deny this inconvenient fact, mainly because it challenges their comfortable paradigm of believing that the war on terror is necessary to keep us safe. But it should be no surprise that when you put your life on the line to defend your fellow Americans, that you want a commander-in-chief who's decisive. When it's your life on the line, it's offensive to hear candidates to debate if there should be 100 or 130,000 troops in Afghanistan. But Ron Paul always knows the answers before the questions are asked. You want a president who will put America's security first, not Iraq's, not Afghanistan's, and not Israel's. And it's generally reassuring to know that you will only be deployed with a moral imperative, a just cause, and a clear mission to accomplish. Or as Ron Paul would call it, a constitutional declaration of war. But the deeper reason so many troops support Ron Paul is that those who have their lives on the line are much more likely to question the status quo and have a special incentive to consider Ron Paul's message of liberty. And so many of them are waking up to the true violent nature of government and embracing voluntarism. The simple idea that all human beings should be respected and having a law to back you up does not justify forcing your will on others. To find out more about Veterans for Ron Paul, please check out Ron Paul is the choice of the troops.com, and for my show, please see AdamVersusTheMan.com.
Adam Kokesh, again, as he just said, AdamVersusTheMan.com. I'm going to bring this to you right away, Robert Vaughn. You are the California State Director for the Ron Paul campaign. You are wearing a handsome lapel pin announcing same. I want to ask you, let's talk realistically about Ron Paul. His message clearly resonates with a lot of people. It is my opinion that he won't be the next president of the United States. That being said, the part of his message that Adam Kokesh is talking about here is that he feels that we should not be involved in these wars. And he is almost an advocate for every enlisted person in America when he does that. He says that there is almost a cavalier way that American politicians have dealt with wars. What do you feel is, A, the appeal of Ron Paul, and B, why people don't respond to Ron Paul?
Ron Paul tells the truth. That's one thing that can turn off a lot of people here when they just listen to lies their whole lives. We've been lied to as far as the media about fighting these wars, war on terror, war on poverty, war on drugs. And every time you have a war, you have to build all the resources and get all the resources and all the bureaucracy you put in place. A non-interventionist foreign policy does not mean that we're going to become an isolation country. That means we still have diplomacy. He also believes in the free markets. That means we're going to be trading and talking with people about our resources, what we can trade, what we can build, what we can, as far as intellectually or physically trade with them. And also as a service person that he was, why are we putting veterans in harm's way, protecting corporate interests overseas?
Right, but that is a legitimate and honest question to be asking, and it's a question that's asked all the time, whether it's of Ron Paul or Jimmy Carter or Mike Dukakis running for president. People are going to ask that question and have for a very long time. But does your military perspective, and when you have when you have the sort of the history of being in the military, does your perspective on foreign policy change, and in what ways does it change?
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason that so many veterans came home from the war and became active in the anti-war movement, became advocates for veterans' rights, became advocates for the people of Iraq and Afghanistan who were unjustly killed and who still endure the effects of the U.S. wars. They did that because of the experiences that I went through, that so many of my brothers and sisters in uniform went through, saw the reality of the war, and then saw that not only did we not want that to happen to anyone else on either side, but that we had a special duty and obligation to do what we could to make sure that those things didn't happen again.
And we hear, Robert, about all of the popularity of Ron Paul within active enlisted Americans. How much is politics discussed? I mean, we always hear, the president's the commander-in-chief. We don't talk politics, but of course you're in the bunker, and you were raised by a Republican or a Democrat. You're fighting a war that was waged by a Republican or a Democrat, most likely. How much is it talked about, and how much are we to believe that yes, Ron Paul is the most popular right now among all active enlisted?
I think of anybody who's ever served or ran for office, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And the Constitution clearly states we should not go to war unless Congress declares war. And I think many service people, we always talk about politics. What is the future? I mean, I knew when I joined the Navy and I voted for Ronald Reagan, I knew one thing he was going to do. He was going to make sure that all those prisoners in Iran were going to get loose, right? They were going to come home, right? And then I thought he had a non-interventionist foreign policy, just like Ron Paul. And then we ended up in
Grenada and Libya
and we just keep, it just seems like, they are not listening. They say, let's honor our soldiers. And our soldiers and our active military personnel and our veterans, a friend of mine, Colonel John Furr, spent 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton, says, this is an insanity foreign policy. We don't even go in to win. We just go into, just sort of like push the powers that be back, and then, like in Vietnam, we take this hill, and all of a sudden, after we're done taking the hill, we just leave and go.
Yeah.
We cut and run, and that's what we're seeing, even in Afghanistan and Iraq.
And I can't think of anyone who hasn't gone to Afghanistan, any nation that hasn't gone into Afghanistan that hasn't cut and run either. Sheryl, I want to ask you this. Do you think, or in what ways would it be different, the attitudes about going to war, the attitudes about enlisted people being forced to serve and redeploy, were we to have a draft here as opposed to an all-volunteer military?
A draft, I think, would be a good thing in some ways, but volunteer army, or volunteer military, is that really the answer? A draft in order to get enough people to serve in the military, that might be something that's necessary in the future. But for now, as far as all volunteer.
But don't you think that some of these people who are making the decisions about war, if they knew that their sons and daughters, I mean, this is a basic question, it's an obvious question, because of the financial disparity between the people that are serving in the military right now and the people that would be forced to serve in the military, don't you think they would think twice in many more occasions? And I'll ask this of you, Mike, if they were sending their own sons and daughters to war?
Well, I'll say first of all that I think there is a draft in this country. There's an economic draft in this country, and that's evidenced by the fact that the U.S. military was experiencing a recruiting crisis up until the financial collapse in 07-08, where they could not meet the recruiting numbers. As soon as the crisis hit, it reversed, and there was record numbers of people joining the military. Young people joining the military today, 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old young people coming out of high school, are not joining the military because they want to go to Afghanistan, go on patrol every day, walk around in a circle, and wait for a bomb to blow up under them and blow one of their legs off. That's not why they're joining the military. They're joining the military because unemployment for young people coming out of high school is through the roof, that the cost of a college education is going through the roof, that social services, things that poor families depend on, are being gutted. That's the reason that people are going into the military, because people have no other choice because the economy is so bad.
So it's again, it goes back to the 99-1, and I hate to rely on it because I even argue against it sometimes when we talk about the banking industry. But we're talking about the people that have to serve versus the people who have the luxury of saying, I don't want to serve. And what changes that? I mean, we're not going to solve it right here, but Robert, what do you think would change the dialogue over the necessity of having these people enlist who don't really want to do it, and not only that, then having people who never enlisted sending them away?
I think, I grew up in a family. My grandmother saw her son die in World War II, and I saw what it did to her. Right? And it doesn't just not only affects the military people who go to war, it also affects the family at home. And these people, if we're going to have a draft, let's start with the politicians' sons and in the military industrial complex and everybody who builds bombs and wars. If they have sons and daughters, let's start with their draft.
Well, that's to the point.
We'll give you a 2-year mandatory service, and then you go over to Afghanistan and serve your country. If you're going to make money off the military, I think maybe you should put a little more skin in the game. And that's it. They don't have skin in the game. It's our skin. It's our sons and daughters' skin. I'm afraid, my family served in the military. It was sort of an obligation. My father served in the Navy, I served in the Navy, my brother served in the Navy, uncle in Marines, and all throughout 200 years of history of my family. And it was an obligation to pay something back to this country that has given us so much in freedom. And we don't, and that's a real scary thing. We're not seeing the freedoms anymore that we used to have. We can't speak out without being forced, accosted by police officers, or having a new bill, saying Homegrown Terrorism Act. If I'm holding a sign and speaking out against the war, I can be arrested.
Right. Yeah, and that is one of the most frustrating things as someone who hasn't served in the military. Mike, you were the most recent active military here. When you were over in Iraq, is politics discussed very often, and how much is it discussed?
I would say yes on a basic level for everyone. I was in Iraq in the invasion in March of 2003. I occupied the country for 12 months. And in terms of politics, the most common point of discussion was, what the hell are we doing here, and when are we going home? And I'm a no today, because many active duty military members are in our organization. These are the same conversations that are happening. So there was a lot of animosity towards George W. Bush when I was in Iraq, because we were saying, we don't believe the reasons that we were sent here, and we want to go home. We don't know what we're doing here. But for service members who went through that anti-Bush reaction, found themselves in the very same position when President Obama was elected, that they were still in Iraq. They were still dying in Afghanistan. They still die in Afghanistan to this day. And so I think what the numbers show of Ron Paul supposedly being the choice of the troops, I don't think that this means that, as Adam Kokesh said, that because they're putting their lives on the line, they have susceptibility to embrace liberty and volunteerism and libertarianism. I think what that means, it doesn't mean that Ron Paul as an ideologue is winning over soldiers ideologically. I think what it shows is that if you have an anti-war position saying, we want to bring you all home immediately and not send you anywhere else, if that's given a mainstream platform, that it's going to resonate with service members.
So it's basically about end this goddamn war, is what there's. I mean, is that what you're saying? That whatever will get us out of here,
unless
we want that.
Directly attacked, I think we should never do preemptive wars, and that's what's happening now. We're doing preemptive wars. It's an insanity. This sounds like Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany did preemptive wars. Okay, Poland's going to attack us. Let's attack them first. This is, in American history, this never be thought of unless it is a sort of a brainwashing of the masses.
And Sheryl, I want to ask you if you have a theory on this. What can be done then from rank and file military veterans? I'm not talking about the decorated battalion chiefs and the Pentagon workers, et cetera. The rank and file to start ending this kind of involvement in unending war, intractable war. What can their voices do, especially when we know we're going to have a president, either reelected or elected, who has never served in the military?
Well, one thing I would suggest is that when you get out of the military is to join a veteran service organization, because that's how legislation has changed in this country. We're talking the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, DAV, Iraq, Afghanistan veterans. All of these groups exist for the primary purpose of changing the laws in this country to provide benefits for our veterans. Really.
But I'll argue with you, Sheryl, that I appreciate that I don't know that that's making as much of a difference as something like March Forward, which is taking, I would say, a much more radical approach to solving a problem. Where's the middle ground there, or is there any?
That's a hard question to answer, because if you're active duty and you take a stand, if you want to make the military career, there goes your career. So how much are you willing to make a stand as an individual who's currently on active duty? So that's what you ask yourself as a active duty person.
Right.
So if you're only in for one enlistment and you want to stand up, this is the group to be involved in, because they're making a difference. But if you don't want to make that commitment, then just serve your time. Get out. Once you get your discharge, then what's great about this youngest generation of veterans, they are involved in their community. Yeah. They come out and they're involved, and they said, we're standing up, we need a change.
And they're running for office, which
Absolutely.
I think is important as well. So we will be back on The Point talking about games and gamers and how that affects our military mind. Welcome back to The Point. Michael Shure with you. We're joined by Mike Prysner, an Iraq War veteran, Sheryl Shaffer, who was a personnel specialist in the Women's Army Corps from 1968 to 1971. Robert Vaughn, to my right, is the California State Coordinator for the Ron Paul presidential campaign and a former aviation technician in the U.S. Navy. Guys, I want to talk now about something that is not necessarily off subject. I want to talk about video games and the way that video games have possibly desensitized us to what the military does, and whether they are an instrument in making military action even more distant to the average American. In the same way, I think that we get desensitized to crime from things like, Grand Theft Auto. When I hear about a game like Call of Duty, I think, wait a second, is this too much? And then is the military learning from the games? Are the games learning from the military? We can talk about drones. I want to know all about this. Sheryl, you don't strike me as a gamer, but I learned that you are, in fact, a gamer. And I want to know what you feel as someone who has been both in the military and on the couch, if you feel that it desensitizes people.
I think so, but only to a certain extent, because it is just a game. Reality is completely different. So you have scenarios that are built into this game to obtain a certain objective, to win that fake battle. It's a good thing in teaching, in the military they use a lot of the younger veterans, active duty people that are gamers, because they have quick eye-hand coordination, and when you're operating a drone, because a lot of really expert gamers go into operating the drones,
right?
They're sitting in a remote base. They're not actually in a war situation, but they're in war. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense.
But coming back to reality in a war, one of the subjects I would like to kind of talk about a little bit is what's happening with the women in the active duty military right now. Because you talk about, we see a lot of these welcome home stories with women veterans coming back to their family, but the real dirty little secret that the military does not want the general public to know is military sexual trauma and PTSD, and how it is devastating this generation of women veterans. If you are a woman in the active duty military and you have been raped, if you stand up and say something happened, there goes your military career. A lot of these women aren't even reporting this. There have been 19,000 reported sexual assaults within the last 10 years.
Well, I think in keeping it to the point, which is talking about games and talking about the effect of, but I don't think that it veers too far when you talk about desensitization, because there's so much that happens in the military that none of us know about, but there's so much that happens in the military that makes us numb to its actual occurrence. So when you hear about these 19,000 reported cases of rape, of course we would assume that there are more that go unreported, because in society alone there are. But I guess it sort of feeds the argument here. Is that desensitization to what women go through, to what to gays in the military go through, is the desensitization mirrored at all in the way that we play games? And it's almost hard for me to say that with a straight face, Mike, because to compare a video game to these real issues that Sheryl's talking about, that we're all talking about, it seems a little trivial. But the truth is, that's an instrument, and so many people who are going into our Army and our Navy and our military right now are playing these games. So is there a disconnect now? We're so disconnected from so much.
Well, I don't think that it desensitizes people, because in order for it to desensitize people, it would have to, in fact, reflect reality, which it does not. What these games do is it convinces young people that this is something that they want to do. They want to go be this action hero in this other country, and that what they played in games actually does represent reality. If it showed you the reality, it would show you ripping families apart in the middle of the night. It'd show people being tortured in detention facilities. It would show the civilian casualties, dead children, the real aftermath of war. It'd show you your best friend shooting himself in the middle of the night because he couldn't deal with the trauma. This is the reality of military service. But I think really, one of the aspects of these video games that really, is truly disgusting is that these are taking place, games like Call of Duty that take place in the Mideast theater of war, where you're shooting these, faceless, demons and things like that. The dehumanization of the people abroad. These are countries that today and actively are decimated and destroyed destroyed by the effects of the war. That's what's not shown in the video game. In Iraq, over 1.3 million people were killed. In Afghanistan, tens of thousands and more every day. So the game that is supposed to be separate from reality are taking place in places that are completely devastated with the worst humanitarian crises, the worst catastrophes of this era.
So, you know, hearing what Mike just said, I mean, it all makes sense, and it's all really true. Do these games just trivialize? I mean, should they? I don't want to say they should be illegal or you know, that I'm for censorship, but don't they trivialize what war really is, and aren't they dangerous to that extent?
I don't think so. I really don't think so, because gamers know they're playing a game. It's just a game.
Well, I see what you're saying. People know that it's just a game, just like they know it's just an actor on the screen. But you know, Old Yeller still makes you cry. I mean, you know, so there's something that is real that affects us about them.
As a, you know, I'm a gamer too, and as a gamer, I see the progressions of game. I remember Pong.
Yeah.
That was the first video game, just two paddles and a thing going across.
Finally, a game that I actually played. Yeah.
And the real part about it is I used to play a lot of these military games, and they used to be like Sub Chaser, and it was always World War II. And as he says, you know, the Call of Duty and these new games coming out, and even what they call America's Armies, which is basically an army recruiting tool. It's run by the Army. Mm-hmm. Has its own website. People can go on and, you know, do the first game of shooters.
Well, so there we go. I mean, then it is reality. And then, you know, then you look at all this sort of advanced military warfare. You look at drone planes flying over Yemen. Drone planes are essentially a video game.
But as Michael pointedly said, they don't get the realistic aftermath of what war is. I mean, you know, when I knew when I was playing Sub Hunter or these World War II games, you know, this is over. But, you know, I also knew people who lived during that time, you know, and they were never the same as they were before they came.
And it's not just that as well, because, you know, it's on one hand to say that, you know, it doesn't reflect the actual reality of what's going on. And so when you actually go to war, you know, you don't come back when you die. You can't take a lot of damage. You're just dead. Your friends are dead. And people that you shouldn't be fighting are dead also. But the overarching thing in all of these games is this aspect of this hyper-patriotism, of this over-glorification of military service, of combat. And what that's telling young people, what it's telling people in this country is that the wars that the U.S. is engaged in, and that when we're sending our brothers and sisters in uniform abroad, that what they are doing is necessary, what they are doing is just, what they are doing is brave and it's honorable. And that's a complete distortion of reality. These are wars that majority of people do not support. They're wars that are catastrophes for the civilian population, and wars that are exposed as being based on nothing but lies. And the real rationale, of course, is much more sinister.
Yeah, that's a great point. And while you were talking, it made me want to ask this question of the three of you, not entirely off subject, but going to what Mike was just saying. These wars, what should our role be? I mean, the three of you have served at different times and in different ways in the military. I'm going to ask you specifically about Syria right now, because I've noticed that we have done nothing in Syria, that the world has done nothing and sort of stood by while Syria sort of burns, really. And it is no different, other than the fact that they have no oil in Syria, it is no different than any of the other countries that have enjoyed an Arab Spring, that have enjoyed our support, our allies. As someone who served in the military, and I know you'll have a specific point on this, being just knowing that your sort of libertarian views on these things. Also, I'll start with you. What should we just sit here and let Syria deal with Syria?
I think the people of Syria need to deal with Syria, and this is what it took in our own country about revolution. When the egregious, you know, the government gets so egregious that they have to rise up and take back themselves. In Iraq, we had a totally different situation. The people in Iraq weren't rising up to throw Saddam Hussein out. No, you know, that there was no real support for our troops to go into and say, we're going to liberate you. Yeah. Just like in World War II, we were liberating them from Nazi occupation.
Yeah.
Right now, we sort of see that with the Arab Spring, you know, going, but do we commit our troops that are already stretched too thin? I mean, we have endless welfare and endless welfare.
Why are we the world's policemen? Why is it up to us to solve all these nations' problems?
Well, I asked that, and it's a good question. When do you go from being a policeman to someone who's maybe it says beautiful things about our country, that we see human rights violations and we see a murderous regime and we want to go in and help. So there's another way of looking at that as being people who go in and help rather than being a murderous regime. But again, I don't want to send somebody in to go do that and put them in harm's way. So it becomes a difficult Good Samaritan type thing. And Mike, I saw you wanted to answer when I...
Sure. I mean, I think the U.S. government does want regime change in Syria. I think that there are actions taking place that are fostering civil war in Syria, that are creating the conditions for intervention. But I think, you can look at all these different countries and instances in isolation, but we have to keep in mind the real role of the U.S. Military in the world, the real role of the United States in the world as this military superpower. And as much as people would like to think and hope that it's possible, there is no possible way that in this current system, with this current government, with the current people who are really pulling the strings, the big banks and corporations, there is no such thing as a humanitarian intervention on behalf of the U.S. military. There are countless examples in the past that prove that to be true, and the same is true today. Any amount of intervention by the United States has ulterior motives.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to say that because I look at it as a game. I look at them sitting back and say, yes, we won't go to Tunisia, but we will go to Libya. We will go to Egypt, but we're not going to go to Syria. And having not being a gamer myself, and not, again, to reiterate, being ever in the military, that's how I sort of see them doing this, sitting back, deciding what to do, the same way you would sit back and choose a game or choose a chapter on your joystick and go and advance that way. So that's why it's amazing to me, the tie from the video game and Call of Duty to the actual game that they're playing in deciding where to go in, where to intervene. I also, when it comes to the games, I find them, there's a racist element to it too, which we haven't touched on. I think we're doing a disservice to the conversation without touching on it a little bit. It is what it does, because it desensitizes people to the differences in the world.
Absolutely, and I alluded to it earlier in the opening of this segment. The dehumanization factor, these faceless monsters in these video games that aren't really people, and this isn't just through video games, but this is through military training from day one when you're in basic training, through the media, through these Islamophobic things that are put out, the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bigotry that is so pervasive in American culture, but especially in the military. And this has a very specific purpose. It's been used since we were trying to justify the slave trade, trying to justify the Vietnam War, the slaughter of the Native Americans. Racism and dehumanization is an essential tool because it's saying to service members, kill these people because they're not really people, or kill these people because they're nothing like you, they're nothing like your families, we're something different. But the reason that so many service members turned against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, like in all the wars in the past, and became activists against the wars, is because they realized that they had everything in common with the people that they were being told to kill and the people that were ordering them to kill. They realized they didn't have anything in common with those millionaire politicians and their billionaire buddies on Wall Street.
That's where you get your first case of a bleeding heart, I guess, and that's how it happens. So Michael Prysner, I give you the last point on The Point this week. Thank you all. It's been enlightening, especially for me, who has not had this perspective before and has not been able to share with so many different experiences in this way. Michael Prysner from March Forward, Sheryl Shaffer, who is working now with a group called Veterans Helping Veterans and can be seen on Blip TV. Robert Vaughn, again you're with the Californians for Ron Paul this year, and you're also doing work with the Liberty wing of the Republican Party. Is there anything else that any of you want to say about projects that you're involved with specifically?
Sure. Well, as we've addressed in this segment, it's a really dire situation for service members today. It's an urgent situation where so many are dying, both at home in garrison and deployed in the war that is wildly unpopular in the military and in the United States and in Afghanistan as well. As I said earlier, the only solution to this isn't waiting for the politicians. It's soldiers and veterans ourselves organizing together, taking action, refusing to take part in that criminal, immoral war, and advocating for our own interests. That's what we're doing in March Forward. You can go to marchforward.org, read lots of other testimonies, but also if you're a service member or a vet, we need you because we have the strength in numbers and we're the ones that are really going to be winning things in our interests.
Sheryl Shaffer.
Join AMVETS, join any veteran service organization. That's how legislation is changed.
There's an organization, if I don't mention it, I probably get spanked. It's the Oath Keepers, and that's one group that actually believe in supporting their oath of office. We're also raising money through California Freedom PAC to support liberty ideas, liberty candidates, and non-interventionist foreign policy candidates and political action.
Sounds like great work, Robert. Thank you. I'm Michael Shure. You can see me on Current TV's The Young Turks, weeknights on Current, and on the Young Turks Network hosting 2012 until the election, maybe even a little bit afterwards. Thanks for watching The Point.